We always remind you as we do this that the Voice and Viewpoint is San Diego's oldest and only African American publication, serving 89 zip codes, 17 cities, unincorporated areas, including 30 some communities. We are available online. We also give papers to a number of our churches, and we can be purchased in retail outlets like 7-Elevens and single copy papers and newsstands. And you can subscribe and receive it in the mail. So our theme has always been, or our motto has always been, a people without a voice cannot be heard. And that here we are serving San Diego's African and African American communities, which is a very important position to have considering the rich diversity that we have here in San Diego. If you choose to join us this evening, we're going to talk about many of the propositions, but we have an open mic situation with this, and you can follow. We have the propositions up, but we always like to tell you that you can either join us by phone at 858-251-6111, or you may go to godradio1.com and join us through the internet. Either way, we welcome your questions, your comments, your participation. Okay, Dr. Thompson.
Well, Dr. Warren, it's good to be here. So many propositions that are on the ballot, and I think that it's important that we get into it. This voting guide is going to be a tool that we're going to be able to use throughout this election season, and it's something that I believe that our community looks forward to each and every year. So I'm ready to get into discuss. I'm ready to get the education on, and I'm going to pitch it over to our managing editor just to kick off everything. How are we doing this evening?
Oh, wonderful. So nice to be here if I can talk this evening. It's been a long, long day, long month, really. So did you want to hear about what's popping in the paper?
What's popping in the paper and what is going on? Start to, like I say, we passed it to you to start it all off, and then we're going to pass right back to Dr. Warren. We're going to get right
All
into
right,
this proposition.
sounds good. Well, you definitely want to check out our issue that's coming out tomorrow on newsstands and online for free on our website. We've got the key dates for the election. So if you're wondering how much time you have to vote, to register to vote rather, and to vote, actually, there's some key dates there for you. You have until the 21st to register if you haven't registered already. And we have some information about Kamala Harris's NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists interview, some insight into that, and also the debate that happened between Gloria and Turner. Just a recap of that happened last Tuesday. So some interesting things along with some great community events that you want to check out.
Well, I'm interested. You guys reviewed the debate. How was it? Was it good? Was it bad? I was out of town. I didn't get any word on it. Can you update a brother?
Well, it was definitely an interesting conversation. Some interesting points made on both sides, and it's a tight race, which is really interesting. Tight race.
Well, there was several problems. The debate was pre-recorded, number one. It was not in front of a live audience, and Turner made an observation about that. And I thought it was very interesting because I remember in years past when we had live mayoral debates. I remember moderating one long ago, and there was public there and public questions and input. And so I think I have a concern as I watch what's taking place. I think Turner did a very good job of presenting himself, and I think that while Todd Gloria is articulate and presidential in terms of how he presents himself, that he doesn't talk as much as he should. He's not really campaigning as hard as he should be. And I think that when you look at a situation where there's a 4-point lead in local polls between Turner and Gloria, I think Gloria could lose the race. Mm-hmm. And I think beyond who's doing the polling, I've run for office 3 times in this state, and it's a very interesting place. Turner is a former Marine lieutenant colonel with 23 years of service. Someone was making the observation that, well, you haven't run a big city. And his position was, I've run organizations far bigger than the city of San Diego, which is true in terms of his rank. And then he, after retiring from the Marines, he became a San Diego police officer, where he served for 8 years. And I have a hard time, no matter what the polls say, I have a hard time believing that San Diego police officers are not going to vote for one of their own. And not only will the people vote for one of their own, but Turner's very appearance is more Marine, rugged. He fits the bill in terms of what the good old boys might want. There's still a large element of the population that is not happy about the fact that the mayor is LGBTQ, and people have accepted it. And I know people within our community who are supporting Turner because of that factor, because they can. And I think that can be an issue with the churches. I don't think they will discuss it openly, but I think in terms of church doctrine, it can be a factor. And I want to be clear that this doesn't take anything. Gloria has done a lot of good things. I think he's been a good mayor. As he pointed out to people, in the crisis following Bob Filner's resignation, when he was president pro tem of the city council, he took that position and guided the city through it until they got to the special election that put Kevin Faulkner in. And so I've always considered him presidential. He served on the city council. He's done a term in the state assembly. He's close to Vice President Harris. He's a leading chairman of committee and task force within the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And if you want to see how important the U.S. Conference of Mayors can be in terms of a launching pad, all you have to do is look at Leon Panetta. And Panetta, I remember when he was just a city council member, because I was a policy consultant to both the league and the cities and the Conference of Mayors. And he went straight up the food chain from a council member to mayor. He went on in terms of becoming director of the CIA. He just did a lot of things, and a lot of doors have opened for Gloria because the Conference of Mayors always has an inside track to the White House, no matter what party is in control. And so I think that the mayor will probably be offered a position if Harris wins, even though he says he's not interested and he wants to stay here. We just have to look very closely at what's going on. So I know I said a lot about that, and I wanted to mention that because we led with it. And I don't know if either of you had a comment, because I want to say something very significant before we get into the propositions.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay, one of the things I want people to understand is why we have propositions in California. And the propositions represent a safety valve. You see, first we elect the legislature, who is supposed to make the laws and pass the rules for us. The propositions represent a safety valve for when the legislature fails. And so what happens is, when the legislature fails to act on the issues that people want to see, the Constitution allows them to get X number of signatures, to get an element qualified, to get it on the ballot, to put it before all of the people in the state so that they can vote. And so that's what's happened with these propositions we have. They have garnered the hundreds of thousands of signatures. They've been through the vetting process with the Secretary of State. We have the language that we use in our voting guide on the propositions and the measures, because we have 3 measures for San Diego. This language basically comes out of the Legislative Analyst's Office in Sacramento, which is the arm of the legislature, the nonpartisan arm that looks at both the pros and the cons of what these issues are and what they're going to cost us. And so propositions can be expensive because they represent the approving of bonds to go out, and then the bonds we borrow on, and we have to pay back over a number of years. So as we look, for example, with Proposition 2, which is supposed to help with education, we already have a number of propositions that we're paying. Usually there's a 10-year window. The $10 billion that's going to be approved in Proposition 2 over the life of the bond itself and the interest, we're going to end up paying almost $8 billion in interest. And so that's one of the concerns that people have, that it's not free money. And as you know, based on interest rates, people buy bonds. I mean, we see that with the government. You remember when we were in school, we used to buy saving bonds, and they were big on pushing those bonds, and we saved those things, and 25 cents a piece here and there. So all that represents the investment angle. So that's what we're up against at this point.
Okay. And so, let's just jump into it and let's go bond by bond. I'm gonna try to blow it up so they can see it. You wanna do a Proposition 2 first?
Yes, Proposition 2, we have it listed as raising $10 billion in bonds to fund construction and modernization of public education facilities. One of the greatest examples of what we're talking about is to look at things, schools like Woodrow Wilson Middle School, Crawford, if you will, Horace Mann, Lincoln. All of these schools were built based on bonds that were floated. Many of them we're still paying for. And the downside of education bonds is that by the time the bonds are approved and they start the construction, the very kids that we were trying to build the schools for are gone. And the birth rate's down, and so we have empty buildings, but we still have new buildings. And so I think that that's going to lead to, at some point, we're going to start making greater use of education facilities. San Diego is very slow to do this. Many years ago, the Mott Foundation took on a love for community schools. And what they did was they went into the communities and said, schools should not close at 3:30 or 4 o'clock. And so they started putting grants in place that kept schools open in the evening, encouraged multiple community use, and brought people in. We haven't done that in San Diego like we should. Our recreation departments, they close too early. They don't offer the kind of diversity that other cities offer. And so this bond is going to be important because the people who have grandkids, because their children have already been through schools, they're not, in many cases, likely to vote for a bond. Okay? But now that we have more grandparents that have to go back into the education thing to raise kids because of problems with the parents, they might be more receptive. So this bond is very important. A lot of people are interested in approving it. We have recommended a yes vote on it, but we encourage you to look at the pros and the cons, because the thing against the proposition is that the bond will increase the obligation by $10 million, which will cost, I said, $18 million. But the key to every bond is that the money that's going to be paid back in interest has to come out of the general fund. And so we're adding the burden to the general fund that the state has at a time when revenue is down, and we're going to see from some of the other measures how we're going to be impacted in terms of the general fund not necessarily having all the dollars that it should.
Well, you know, one of the concerns that I have with different bonds such as this is the misappropriation of funds and the misuse of funds. I know the San Diego Unified School District, one of their bond measures was, I believe, also including air conditioning all classrooms throughout the district, but they hired the cheapest and most incompetent person to do the air conditioning units. And I mean, we're literally seeing air conditioning units that are brand new that are leaking. We're seeing, my favorite one was that they had it whereas when the air conditioner was supposed to be on, it was actually turning on the heater. And when you turn on the heater, the air conditioner would come on. So it was so off, and because, you know, everything's controlled by central office, that they were getting fire alarms during the summertime because they were pushing air, but the schools in the community were getting heat.
Well, you know, and I don't want to leave you out of this conversation.
No, it's fine.
But when you go back to look at the air conditioners, you have to remember the history of what took place. Because there was a time that schools were not air conditioned, just like public housing was not air conditioned. And air conditioning was considered a luxury. But when we started having all of these temperature changes and people died from not having, we started having heat impacting seniors, and we started having problems about our children because we had real bad temperature scenarios here, to the extent that before they did some of these schools, they had to close them and send kids home. And so the problem is not with the bond. The problem is with the contracting process that the school district has used. And I think that the school board and the state needs to hold the people accountable in terms of who they're giving contracts to.
That was my question. How much does the public have a say in those types of decisions? Who are the people hiring the people to do these types of upgrades and
Well,
spending the
what
money?
is supposed to happen is, and I've been, of course, involved with multiple school districts across the nation. The contracts, once the school goes through the bid process and they make the final selection should come before the board for approval. Unfortunately, in some school districts, they get into this tit for tat with the superintendent, and they think that the superintendent should have absolute authority. And so they miss the whole purpose of having a Board of Education, going all the way back to Horace Mann in 1700s when it was Massachusetts Secretary of Education. The whole concept was that the Board of Education is supposed to be the vehicle through which the parents and the community impart the mores that they want the kids to have. And so you shouldn't have to be all that important. You should be able to read, and parents should be able to come. There should be hearings like we now have on things, and a lot of that hasn't happened. So hence you saw the fiasco that took place.
Yeah.
And it went real deep, other than just who was superintendent, if you remember, since you were in the system.
Yeah. All right, so you guys, the recommendation is yes. There's cons, there's pros and cons that you all can make a decision on. Let's go to Proposition 34. The restricts spending on prescription drug revenue by certain healthcare providers.
Well, this is a very interesting one because what's happened is, as we were dealing with this even in Sacramento, people, a lot of healthcare providers, people have money, and the money that they make off of the drugs, the corporate entities in the state, they don't have controls over where they spend the money. Proposition 34 is going to make all kind of profits coming from this activity stay in the state. It's going to have to go back into the schools, or I'm sorry, to the clients, to the people who are being served, the patients. And there are penalties involved if it doesn't go to them. And so we have people doing a very funny scenario where we have a pro vote for Proposition 34, and for some reason Proposition 34 has been coupled with Proposition 33, and Proposition 33 deals with rent control in the state. And we've had rent control efforts both in 2015 and 2018. The last one in 2018 was a Proposition 10, and a lot of us, I've talked about why we had it and what's going on with it. But if we stay with this for a moment, what's against Proposition 34? We show from what the legislative analyst position is that the California Apartment Association, representing a billionaire corporate landlord, doesn't care about patients. Their sole purpose is silencing AIDS Healthcare Foundation, the sponsor of the Rent Control Initiative, and 34, they've kind of lumped them together. So if we're going to be, our position on Proposition 34, I believe, was
TBD.
we didn't take a position yet. And there was a reason we didn't take a position on 33 and 34, because we had the pros and the cons. We had people lining up, and we wanted to take a deeper dive and a deeper look at what was involved with it. And when you really read the legislative analyst position, you get to see the kind of money that's involved in the proposition, where the money is going to now be channeled, the kind of penalties that are there, and all of these things still end up costing us, if you will. So we're keeping our eyes on Prop 34. I believe as of this week, we are recommending that people vote for 34. And of course, most people are looking at 33 before they get to 34.
We're still TBD, at least as of press time.
Yeah, still to be determined.
Right.
And so we're working on our position because our position is not influenced by money or what other people are doing. We have always looked very carefully at what it means to the community. Our community in particular is always impacted differently than other people. And so then people look at what we say when they decide to go vote.
And if I can just say, in the con there, just shows you how convoluted and complex some of these propositions can be. And if you're not having the time to really follow everything from its inception and really understand the background, you can be completely misled about certain things. So it's quite interesting as a voter, to stay on top. It's hard to stay on top of these issues and really know what's going on.
And so the big thing is it's going to close loopholes
Yeah.
that let corporations, and they use examples like letting people buy the naming rights to stadiums, okay? And we know that's a big deal all over the country because corporations started doing it. We saw what happened before Snapdragon when we had Qualcomm, okay? And so that gets to be the major publicity thing, especially with the games. And so we need to have people stop and think about it and not just knee-jerk reaction to the ads.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Qualcomm. Snapdragon is still Qualcomm.
What do you mean
Yeah,
still
it's
Qualcomm?
Qualcomm Snapdragon,
It's
right?
Snapdragon is Qualcomm's product.
Oh, it is.
Yes.
Huh? Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't look at it.
I was always trying to figure out why they call it Snapdragon, and so I had to do some research and find out. I think that's their chip that they have.
Oh,
out of
okay.
Qualcomm.
Oh, I didn't know
and
that part.
So it's really unique that we still got a Qualcomm.
Yeah,
But-
because the name, you want to figure out, well, where did that name come from?
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
I was like Snapdragon Stadium. They couldn't come up with anything else. Aztec
Oh,
Bowl,
so
something.
So now we know the money behind the things that get done, okay?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Where do you want to go next?
Let's go to Proposition 6.
Okay, so we're jumping, okay?
Or do you want to go down because we're doing statewide? Let me do it again.
Yeah,
So let's just do
maybe.
the statewide. So let's go to Proposition 4.
Yeah, and Proposition 4, I have to look at them every time because they jog my memory because I got it all in my head. Where is 4 up there?
I'm gonna pull
Did
this
you
over.
put it?
This is it right here.
Okay.
There it goes.
Proposition 4, $10 billion in bonds to fund state and local parks, environment protection projects, water. Okay, this is a very important proposition because when we look at what's happening in the state in terms of droughts, fires, replenishing areas where we've had burns, floods, all of these kind of things, the environmental, what do we call it? Environmental, what's the term?
Justice?
No, for the environment.
Equity.
No, environment, the environmental things that we're talking about. What,
Oh,
I can't.
that one right there.
Yeah,
Environmental concerns.
yeah, I can't get it in my head, okay. But this proposition is important because the money is spread around and it's spread out in terms of not just parks, not just land, not just droughts, not just devastating wildfire impacts, fighting them, and proactive approach to trying to save money. So I think that we should be in favor of Proposition 4. The people against Proposition 4 take the position that it's an expensive way to fund government spending. This takes you back to what I said at the beginning, that when people are not able to get legislation through the Assembly and the Senate, public interest groups step up, and what do? They get signatures, they get a ballot measure, they get the language approved, they then bring it before the people, so they bypass the legislative process to get what they want done.
And I
And
think
that's
it's important to say, too, when you're reading this, anyone out there interested in this in more detail, the pro and the con are the pro are the people who are for it, their argument, and the con are the people who are against it. So it's like you got to think about, well, what is it? What's behind what they're saying here? You know?
Well, the people against it are saying that, again, every time you see this $10 billion figure there, they're saying that if you approve this for every dollar spent in the $10 billion, there's going to be a $2 cost. But again, this will have to be funded out of the general fund. And so the general fund is going to increase in terms of the debt servicing that it has to do each year on these propositions. And that's where we get the Republicans being ultra conservative and considering that the Democrats are being, spendthrifts and crazy, because, we had a big surplus during COVID, and that went away when all the government went away. So you wonder, how did we go from a surplus to a major deficit? Because the money wasn't there, taxes weren't being collected. So we got a lot of things that come into play. We want to offer the opportunity, Dr. Thompson, if anyone listening with us has a question or comment, we want to give them a chance to do that. We don't want to be so, because we could consume all our time and never hear from anyone on this.
Well,
we didn't want that to happen.
And you can put it in the feed if you have any questions as we go forward. I think right now people are getting their first snapshot of the propositions, and we want to go through it. So we're going down the page, right? So next one is on healthcare, Proposition 35.
Okay. And Proposition 35 is important. It authorizes a tax on managed care organizations to fund Medi-Cal programs. Medi-Cal, and we just did a series of meetings here in the state. Voice and Viewpoint sponsored one with the State Department of Health. The last one that was done at the Live Well Center, and it was called Lunch and Learn. And we brought all the people in from Medi-Cal, because Medi-Cal has been restructured, reborn, if you will. In many respects, Medi-Cal offers more than Medicare at this point, from counseling to all kinds of services that you can't get approved in the Medicare system. But remember, Medi-Cal is also partially funded by the state and partially funded by the federal government. And so one of the problems was that the money that comes into the program from the federal government and the state money had never been codified so that it was built into law as a statute. And so this program will do that. It will make it a fixed standing part of the Constitution, and it will give some teeth to controls. And because we got things like special community care clinics, hospital ERs, family planning, mental health providers, those things are very important, because the money that Medi-Cal allows for mental health cannot be found in Medicare. And so mental health has become one of the big issues of the state, very big issue. And so the question is, what should we do here? We're recommending that there should be a yes vote on the Medicare organizations to fund Medi-Cal, the Medi-Cal organizations to fund Medi-Cal, so that even though the amount of money coming from the feds might change, the amount of money from the state in terms of its matching contribution will be fixed, if I'm giving it corrected. And that makes a big difference for us.
There's a question from the feed. Who creates those propositions? Who creates the propositions?
Oh, so glad you asked. Let me tell you how this works. You often hear me talk about public policy. And what happens is there's a graduating process. First, you have what's called an interest group, where 2 or 3 people get together and they got a concern and they want to see something change. Perhaps one of the greatest examples of that in the state's history was Howard Jarvis and Proposition 12, that had tremendous impact on how taxes can be raised on property that
Proposition 13.
Proposition 13,
Yeah.
that people stay in their homes, and what happens if they move. All of this grew out of having a few people concerned, and they decided that they needed to organize that concern. The organization then became what we call a pressure group, where you had citizens for Proposition 35. And so now what happens next? Now you got to find somebody to fund it. So many times you go to corporate entities and ask them to give money, and their money will be based on what their interest might be or how will they benefit. And so if you get them to fund it, then you have enough money to hire the petitioners that go out, you see them at the grocery store, by your car, every place, and people get hired to get signatures. You see them begging you for your signature. They get often like $3 to $5 a signature. And when they have to spread out all over the state, three or $400,000 could be spent just in getting signatures. And usually they will try to get 500,000 signatures and make sure that they have more than the number required, because when you do signatures like that and you go and check the people who have signed against the voting rolls, so many times they're not registered, they didn't register, and you got people that you have to scratch off. So this is how propositions are born. Once you have the requisite number of signatures, the state gives each group a filing deadline from the time that they initiate their proposition and put the language there to when it has to be in. And if they meet that deadline and the screening shows they had the requisite signatures, then the proposition is approved to go on the ballot. Hence, we have the 10 that we have with us right now.
All right, well, we're going to Proposition 5.
Okay, Proposition 5, allows local bonds for affordable housing and public infrastructure with 55% voter approval. This is a very important proposition because it really changes the constitutional mandate of what's required to get a measure passed like this that has constitutional ramifications. And so by going to 55% of the actual voters as opposed to requiring 60 or a higher number, it makes it easier for those supporting a measure to get signatures to get the measure passed.
Okay.
And so most people want it, some people want it made easier. What do we have in terms of the cons on 5? Those against it says changes
taxes.
the Constitution to make it easier to increase bond debt, leading to higher property taxes. Prop 5 shifts the financial burden from the state to local communities, increasing costs for homeowners, renters, consumers. Politicians wrote the loopholes in Prop 5 so that infrastructure can mean just about anything. And so this is the hook for folks. When you got local government, now you got a state proposition, but he's telling you you're going to be affected locally.
Mm-hmm.
And when people see that, and we're going to see this when we get further down, we're going to see why people will reject some propositions.
And this is where we need to dig deeper, dig a little deeper to
Yeah.
find out who's behind what and why.
And most people don't. That's why, in addition to getting the thing out there, the interest group to the pressure group to the people promoting it, the people opposing it have to get there. Because here's the thing that people opposing often do. They will start a initiative to get signatures and create some language against what you want to have passed. And so the idea is to confuse the public so that you don't know which one to go for.
Yeah.
And if you do that, then it increases the chances that it will fail. So
So
it's all
Prop
about
5
the money.
So on Prop 5, you said vote, you're recommending yes.
Yes, we did recommend yes on Prop 5.
All right, civil rights, Proposition 3.
Proposition 3 is funny. It's a very funny one to me. Protects California freedom to marry regardless of their race or gender. Proposition 3, people say, well, why is this necessary? Because we already have the Marriage Equality Act, and we already have people having the right to marry. Constitutional issues have been. So why is this being done? Many people take the position that this is being done to tighten up the language in the state constitution, because what we're learning from the abortion movement is that even though Roe v. Wade was overturned, if the states had done what Roe offered them before it was overturned, then the Supreme Court decision wouldn't have made any difference. But see, once the court overturns something, if it's not codified in the state constitution, hence we have all of these states now that got abortion issues on the ballot because they didn't have anything in place to stop it. And so in this case with Proposition 3, there's still people who, the conservative movement on the court is that since Trump has 6 conservative justices, the same way they overturned Roe v. Wade, we're looking at them coming at the Marriage Equality Act, because the conservative right never felt that there should have been marriage permitted in the same-sex marriages in the first place. And so now people are feeling the threat. They're also feeling the threat because not only are they coming after them from that standpoint, there was an important Supreme Court case many years ago called Griswold v. Connecticut. And Griswold v. Connecticut actually brought the government into your bedroom because the government was trying to take a position against contraceptives. Well, people were trying to encourage that. And the Supreme Court took the position that the federal government has no vested interest in what goes on in the privacy of one's bedroom. But with this conservative court, you can go back and overturn Roe v. Connecticut. Griswold v. Connecticut, the same way they've overturned Roe v. Wade. Okay? What does all of this mean, folks, for us? That if we don't start reading and paying attention, when we do realize what's happening to us, it's going to be done already, and it's going to be too late. And so we no longer have the luxury of not paying attention. I always remind people what Thomas Jefferson said. Thomas Jefferson said, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. And if you don't watch what you have, you will lose it. We already see them taking away voting rights, what they did to kill that in many ways, fighting against the Floyd Act and the John Lewis Act. All of these things are important. And so we got a couple more up here that are going to be equally as important. So we suggested that this is an easy one. You vote yes for it. The people who are against it think that the languages to the changes to the Constitution, what were they trying to say?
Opening the door to child marriages and
Yeah.
polygamy.
Removes all rules for marriage, opening the door to child marriages, incest, and people are
Changing the
grabbing for
Constitution.
straws and throw stuff out there. That's not the case because we still have laws against incest and all those things now. So we have to pay attention. Okay.
All right, Proposition 6, this is a criminal justice reform.
Oh, this is the dangerous one, okay? And I like to tell people when you look at Proposition 6, I like to remind you of what happened in San Diego when Prop 47 was passed. Prop 47 is almost 10 years ago. I kind of lose track. Bonnie was DA at the time. But Prop 47 decriminalized a lot of activity. It changed from a felony to a misdemeanor, how much marijuana you could have. It came up with a rule that said if you broke into a store and stole something, if the value of what you stole did not exceed $950, it was a misdemeanor. And so what the reason for Prop 47, because people don't often pay attention, the California prison system was under federal receivership because our jails were overcrowded, our inmates were not getting appropriate health care, there were mental issues. We hold a record even in San Diego for in-custody deaths. So all of this stuff was going on. How did we get there? We got there because the law enforcement lobby some 25 years ago decided that we needed 3 strikes. And the whole purpose for 3 strikes was to increase the prison population so that it would increase the overtime pay need of the prison guards, and they benefited from having more people in jail. And that was the sole purpose for it. So they tried to, they did all kinds of constitutionally wrong things, okay? Like the Constitution, I believe in Section 8 has a rule against ex post facto rulemaking. And what that says is that if you did something 10 years ago and it wasn't against the law, well, if we pass a law 10 years later saying it's illegal, we can't reach back and say you are guilty because you did it before the law was passed. And all of that was fed into 3 strikes, and it meant more black folks and Latin people ended up in jail. And so here's the trick today. Today, as you know, in California, we've had these, what do they call them, these raids, when these elements descend on a shopping center or a store,
Flash
and they,
mobs.
what they call them?
The flash mobs.
The flash mobs. They just break in and steal everything, okay? And so the merchants started complaining that they were losing money and we needed tighter laws. And the first step they thought about was increasing the penalties under Proposition 6. But let me tell you the trick to that. The Retail Merchants Association realized that during the pandemic, people were doing more online shopping. So online shopping went through the roof. Amazon and everybody grew. Walmart had to start doing online. And so brick and mortar stores were losing. And so companies did not want to get a bad rep with their clients by just closing the brick and mortar stores because they weren't making as much money as they were making before online shopping started. So they latched on to the flash mobs and said the flash mobs were driving them out of business, and the flash mobs became the excuse for this legislation, which was to give them a way out of brick and mortar without losing their clients. So you see, you have to do your homework, folks. There's so much involved behind each of these things.
Okay. So yes on 6.
Come on there, look, Tanya's sitting here smiling. She's got a
No, I was just saying, so you're helping us with that. You're helping us with our homework, Dr. Warren.
okay. Okay.
Proposition 36.
36. While we're getting ready for that, Dr. Thompson, does anyone have any comments so far?
Well, Patricia Tasher said they want to give complete immunity to police. That means that they can walk up to you and shoot you with no cause and get away with it.
Well, which was the one I was just dealing with? Number 6, did I miss?
You were doing 6.
You're
I
doing
know.
6.
Yeah.
6. This is 36, but did I mix them? Because I had them all running
Where
together
is
in my
it? I have it
head.
in
Where's
mine.
6
Here's
is up
6.
here?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I was doing 36,
Oh.
but Proposition 6 is a simple one. Okay? So if I can skip from 36 and go back to 6 for a moment.
Okay, we're up at 6.
Okay.
Okay.
Proposition 6 is kind of funny, okay? It removes involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime from the state constitution. It says that you can't be treated as a slave if you're in jail. Oh, I thought slavery was abolished. Well, under the 13th Amendment, involuntary servitude is permitted. You see, we get confused. Under the 14th Amendment, we got due process. We have a corporation being created as an artificial person, and we have all these things happening, equal protection and all of that. But if you were convicted of a crime, your constitutional rights were suspended. So what happens here under Proposition 6 is that, for instance, if you were in jail and they got you making license plates, and they don't pay you for making the license plates, there's nothing you can say about it, okay? Because it's involuntary servitude, but there's no law against it. So by passing this, removing involuntary servitude, it says that if you're serving a jail sentence and they want to put you to work in jail, as an alternative to not paying you, one of the options they have is to give you credit from your work against your time served. Okay? And so now some people feel that this is going to run the price up in terms of the state, because if you have to start paying the prisoners, then the money's got to come from somewhere, and it's going to be an attachment on the general fund. So some people don't want to see that. But the reality is, and a lot of people don't realize this, that even though California was not a slave state, California had one of the strongest fugitive slave acts in the country. And a lot of people were rounded up and shipped back based on that. And so this will deal with efforts to reform the 13th Amendment, will prioritize rehabilitation, lower recidivism, and improve public safety, resulting in taxpayer savings. Everybody don't buy that. The people against it says, no, it won't improve in terms of savings, okay? And so this is another example of what you need to read and look at very closely.
Okay.
Now, we go back to 36 if we can.
Okay.
Because what I was giving you at first was 36. It allows felony charges and increases sentences for certain drug and theft crimes in terms of status. This is going to amend Prop 47 in many ways, Because see, at first you could have so much marijuana on you it didn't make any difference. They would just write you a ticket. And so we know we got the cannabis rules going now. We got a problem in San Diego with some people who went to jail for having cannabis are now trying to get licensed to sell, and they haven't had the record expunged. So you got the record being held against you, and you have some other people like a certain legislator's family members who put together a team of lawyers who have the intent of owning all of the cannabis licenses that are going to be issued in the city, and they're going after much of it in the state. So it's turned into big business. The cannabis issue is very important because even though people are making money, they can't open bank accounts for their cannabis businesses. And the reason you can't open a bank account is because cannabis is still on the restricted drug list of the Federal Food and Drug Administration and the federal government. And so even though states are making it legal, it's still illegal, and therefore you can't use a banking institution to deposit money from what's considered a federally illegal activity.
Yeah.
It's
But-
crazy.
But they can get up to, I think, to $25,000 in credit unions.
And credit, well, some people are working to try to make something work for credit unions. Some people are finding businesses close to them that they can launder their money through. So, because they're making a lot of money, there's no question that the money is rolling in, but it's getting to be where can I stash it?
Exactly.
So what do you say to Patricia Tasker
What does she
about
say?
it giving, I think she's talking about Prop 36, that it gives complete immunity to police. They want to give complete immunity to police, and that means they could walk up to you and shoot you with no cause and get away with it.
I didn't see anything in Prop 36 that said that they could do that.
We're not
Yeah, I
sure.
think
if she-
that in where she is at in Louisiana, I think that might be one of the bills that is going on in Louisiana, you know.
Okay.
So let's move on. You did Proposition 36. Let's go on to Proposition 32.
32.
And we have to move fairly quickly. We only
Yes.
got 10 minutes left now.
Wow. went
Okay.
fast.
Well, all I can say on 32, and it's one of those we will probably come back to because the whole issue of minimum wage is a very important issue. Right now, California has one of the highest minimum wage rates in the state. Right here in California, for instance, people in the fast food industry are getting $20 an hour. The federal minimum wage level under the Fair Labor Standards is not the Fair Labor Standards Act. I'm sorry. The federal wage is $7.50 an hour. So we are way out of whack with what people are making at other places. Okay, this thing was stabilized at $17 an hour minimum wage in California. It would allow it. No, it was at 16. It'll allow it to
Yeah.
go to 17, but then it has some control limits on how it goes from there. And so we need to come back and deal with this in a much greater detail because it's been impacted by things like the California Supreme Court case that dealt with Uber drivers and whether or not they could be treated as employees as rather than independent contractors. And so all of this gets into the Proposition 32. I want to mention, if I can for a moment, the most important elephant in the room right now, and then I'm going to mention the three measures for the city, is Proposition 33. Okay, because Proposition 33 would bring rent control into the state of California in a way that we haven't had it before. And I say that because in 1995, it was a law passed called Acosta-Hawkins. And Acosta-Hawkins did some things so that single-family dwellings were not included under the various rent control issues that municipalities was establishing. LA has a measure of rent control. San Diego's tenant protection ordinance is a joke in terms of putting some real teeth out there, but it's all that we have here at the moment. So what happened was when the housing market crashed in 2009, people lost their homes. Investors bought these homes and they sought to lease them back to the people who had once owned them, and they leased them back with rents that many times were higher than the mortgages that they had been paying in the first place. That meant then that there was no control. And so there was an effort in 2015 to bring some control because the real estate industry and investors, they didn't mind you having some rent control on multi-dwelling units, apartments. But when the single dwelling units, which were the homes that went into foreclosure, they didn't want to see them. And then a strange thing happened on the way to the forum. The investor community realized that where they used to spend a lot of money buying mortgages, it made more sense to buy properties up and to lease them back to the owners, and you could raise the rent whenever you wanted to, as high as you wanted to, and most of them would struggle to pay it because they knew they couldn't buy a home again, and they were trying to live as close to what they'd had before. Tennessee was a perfect example of this problem because some 7 or 8 years ago in Tennessee, properties were being lost and investors were buying homes up in such massive blocks that the state legislature stepped in and passed a law that limited what they could buy and gave the right of first refusal to people. The same thing happened in Nevada, where they were picking up people on the street and making them sign up for loans. They were getting mortgages, and then they were foreclosing, and they were moving the stuff. So all of this is going on. And, well, I won't go into it in detail. We don't have enough time. But there's so much more to each of these, and I would love for us to really, if you're really interested, to really raise the questions about what you want. There's no stupid question. You cannot possibly know all that I know about these because it's cumulative. Is over some 25, 30 years of studying property and propositions and political science and government and law. But what can happen is that information can be used to help make this simple for you so that you don't get tricked in the funny language that they're using with somebody smiling at you and handing you a popsicle and telling you to go vote the way they want to, and they're going to be your friend.
Or trying to scare you into a
Yeah,
vote.
because they do.
Yeah.
Can we just finish up the last ballots for the city?
Yes.
Um,
Okay, we got three things here.
Three measures.
Three measures for the city, okay? Measure C amends the San Diego Charter relating to the Board of Education, okay? And what does it say? It would allow the San Diego Charter Section 66 to change, what's that? The circumstances, the election of measures of the Board of Education for the San Diego Unified School District. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Okay.
It was something special about it.
Isn't it changing the boundaries?
If two or fewer candidates, including write-in candidates who meet the requirements set
If two or
out.
fewer candidates, including writing candidates, who meet the requirements set out in the code, qualify for a particular school board seat in a municipal primary election, voters will vote on that seat at the municipal general election and not the primary. So that's the big key. Right now, you go in the primary, and then you got to wait and come back to general election. And they're going to eliminate the primary. But we also had another measure before affecting school districts that re-established the boundaries for it, okay?
Yeah.
And so we need to look at all of that very closely. That was C.
Recommended.
What's D, Tanya?
That's the Ethics Commission.
Oh, okay. The Ethics Commission is restructured here. It's created as an independent entity, okay? It's given teeth, it's given staff. The members are no longer appointed by the mayor. It has sufficient resources to deal with its responsibilities. And so we need a strong ethics entity. And this represents taking something from what was just a window dressing thing to a real scenario, just like we did with the CPP, replacing the police review board.
The last one?
Oh, the last one is the related to transactions and use tax. We have people wanting to give us a 1 cent use tax, and that is supposed to raise what, $400 million, and it's supposed to help the revenue fund infrastructure projects. This can be tricky, folks. Some years ago, National City raised their sales tax by a half a percentage point, I remember. And the result was that the residents of National City started shopping in Chula Vista and San Diego because they didn't want to pay a higher tax for the same product when they were just a few blocks away to do something different. And so we need to always ask who is going to really benefit if there's a tax increase. Your favorite P, for instance, Dr. Thompson, what they did with the trash collection. You were arguing over, are we going to charge the citizens for tax collection? And what do? You spend $2 million studying it. That $2 million could have gone toward just letting people continue having the service that they had without paying the money. And so that means we're not watching these folks as closely as we should.
Well, Dr. Warren, I tell you, Proposition 101, 102, 3, and 4, we wanted to do that tonight. We're going to take each proposition a little bit slower as we go forward. But if you want to spend more time with it, make sure that you go and get your voice and viewpoint. It'll be out on stands tomorrow, and it will be live on the internet.
This is already on the newsstand.
Okay.
This was
This
last
is
week's
already,
paper.
yeah, this was
Okay.
last
Yeah,
week's.
and,
It's also in this week's.
It's on the internet, and many people, when they vote, because the ballots will be mailed out on next week on the 7th, many people,
Or
you'll
before
see them
that.
at the Register of Voters or at their polling site, pull up these measures on their cell phone and go down the list.
Yeah.
Because it's overwhelming with all the names and things that are there.
And the
Okay.
candidate endorsements are in this week's issue. This week's issue that'll be
Yeah,
on
but we
newsstands
didn't even
tomorrow.
touch the county.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are endorsements in other municipalities because of the candidates and the people and the issues. We couldn't get them all here. We're doing more because we're reminding people the Voice and Viewpoint is not Southeast San Diego. It's countywide. And the Register of Voters is doing some business with us, but the bulk of what we are publishing in terms of the pages like this and the endorsements that are coming, we are paying for that ourselves because of the value we put on having an informed electorate.
And just quickly to say too, we're going to have the ballot drop-off locations and voting locations as soon as they become available. So that hopefully will be in the paper next week for next week's issue.
Well, Dr. Warren. with
And
that being
Latanya's
said-
done a phenomenal job of organizing that, just like we did for the primary, so you can see where you can vote, what time it's open, where the ballot boxes are, because many drop boxes at the libraries. And if you follow the news, many states are having a tremendous amount of difficulty just even getting drop boxes. And the way the ballot is done now, you can track your ballot from the time you fill it out and measure it. You can track it because of the barcode
That's
and
right.
everything,
Sure
the way it's
can.
set up.
That's right.
So this, and Latanya and staff has spent a great deal of time this week dealing with unsheltered and homeless people and their right to vote. And that's a very important thing. So you don't have to have a street address to be able to vote. And we want people to understand that.
And with that being said, Dr. Warren, we're going to close off there. Y'all tune in next week. We got some more great topics. I want to thank everybody for your support. Please get your newspaper. Make sure that you follow them online, get their app, download the app, and continue to listen to GOD Radio 1. Y'all have a blessed evening.